My first visit to New Orleans was just like any other tourist, but it was a very salutary one for me. I had uh, just arrived from Eglinton, Florida, where I spent 4 months in the sand of the panhandle of Florida at an Air Force base, Eglin Air Force Base. I was a general medical officer first at headquarters, where I held a first aid call and spent a lot of time reading and trying to find out what the Army was all about. And then after a few months, I went out to one of the auxiliary fields where I was the doctor for what turned out to be very healthy young men. I didn't have much to do. They were all so such good shape that I spent more time reading and talking with the officers while the young men went out learning to strafe and do torpedo bombing. Orders out proceed to New Orleans, area, which of course meant we were on our way overseas. On the way, which we spent in a railway car from about 100 years ago. It had been burned out, but our ride was overnight and didn't amount to much. At a stop in Alabama, the young enlisted man got out drunk, vomiting, crying because they knew they were going overseas. But listening to one of the men play the guitar and decide they would make the best of it. When we arrived in New Orleans, it was to another set of wooden barracks with nothing much to do until wait till the rest of the enlisted men and officers came to town. My first Sunday, I just didn't feel like being alone and doing nothing but reading and listening to radio. So I put on my best uniform and decided to get myself a good meal. I knew that Antoine's was the best in New Orleans and probably the best restaurant in the United States. So I proceeded there. It didn't take but a few moments until they took me in and put me right in the middle of a large dining room at a small table by myself. It was covered by a white tablecloth, salt and pepper, and not much else. A few minutes after I was seated, an elderly gentleman in a waiter's uniform came to my table. He was probably in his 60s, white-haired, barrel-chested, but obviously very gentle. He handed me a menu and said he would be back. I looked at the menu and it was covered with a lot of French. I had spent a year and a half at high school French, but I couldn't make much sense of what the food selections were, so I waited. The waiter came back and asked me what I wanted. I stuttered and stammered, and he said, what would you like to eat? And I said, I want a steak. He said, oh, and then he spoke a few more French words, obviously asking me what dressings I wanted. I must have looked stupid, but he said, I will put some herbs on it for you, and I will give you some potatoes. In a few moments, I saw what I thought would be the smallest steak in the house, but it turned out it was the thickest steak, and very tender, and extremely tender. And the potatoes were souffle potatoes. That was my introduction. It was a glorious meal. I enjoyed it immensely.